Oh, hello. Don't know if we've got a whole lot of crew coming. I don't know how many people were interested in the wax, but we shall see.
Is this the wax class?
This is the wax. Yeah, this is the carving of the ring from the beginning of this chapter.
Okay.
So it's no, it's not my wax working class. No, that's a remote. I mean, that's a live in-person class in a few weeks. This is just
Yeah, I thought I was thinking about you because I was cleaning my studio and I have so many wax, for wax class.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna take it now, but I didn't know that I have all that stuff.
Well, then you should take a class if you've got all the supplies already. That's half the battle.
Do you ever come across sheets of wax that are like 20 gauge?
Yep. That's usually the soft wax is in that kind of gauge.
The what?
Soft wax as opposed to the hard wax that we're going to be using today. There's two different styles. There's an additive type of wax and there's a removal type of process with the harder waxes.
No, what I'm talking about is a box. I mean, a sheet of. The sheet is like this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you use it for?
I use it more than I use the hard waxes. So I use it for forming and shaping a lot of the floral work that I do when I do wax work.
Yeah, floral, you're right.
So it's faster, first of all, because you're doing a lot less. You can manipulate it with your hands the way you would metal to a certain extent, in that you can shape it and form it kind of like a foil. But yeah, that's actually my preferred medium. I prefer that to the carving that we're going to do today.
Okay, I'm ready then. So much stuff.
So we'll give people another minute or two just because it's still early, but any questions outstanding from our last sessions all about variations of graver settings? Nothing. Okay. And I would love to see more images coming my way, even if it's work in progress. Carmen has outdone herself and sent me 1,000,005 things, of course, which is awesome.
I am willing to share. Whoever is taking your class, I am willing to share these things.
Sure. So it's an in-person class, so we have materials for them already. But yeah, I use that a lot. I mean, when I'm doing my wax.
Yeah, I should share with you.
But hey, Alan, long time no see. You're on mute if you're chatting with us. We're giving folks another minute or two, and I will do the usual bits and pieces. I don't see anybody new, so I don't have to do the intro stuff. But as always, I'm going to post in all the links to chat.
This.
Yep, that's what we're working with today.
That's what we're going to use today?
So we're doing the setting at the beginning of chapter, what is this, chapter 6. So it's the Roman setting, so there's Gypsy setting and Roman setting sort of bundled together. I'm not a fan of the term Gypsy setting because it's considered a derogatory term in a lot of the world, so I try to avoid it. But it is known pretty commonly in the jewelry industry, so it's hard to get away from.
Yeah.
As always, there's the class schedule for anybody who's looking for it. I'm talking briefly with the folks at Metalworks and may add a Metalworks class towards the end of the year. I just got to get my own stuff together schedule-wise. As a reminder, sorry, go ahead.
Is that the class I signed up for?
You signed up for one of my virtual classes, so no, that's not Metalworks. That's directly with me. I'm just saying I owe them some proposals. They're still interested in some other classes this year, so I've got to send some proposals their way, but that means I have to get my own shit together enough to do that. As a reminder, we're not going to have a session on April 5th because I'll be doing some other things, but we will return on, what does that make it? Returning on the 19th of April, at which point we will do the faux channel settings. that are in chapter 6. And I think that's the last setting, other than it's going to take a little time to get this cast so that we can come back to actually set the stone for today's project. I will also remind you, because it's my favorite time of year for Girl Scouts, that there is a Girl Scout troop in New York City, that if you buy their cookies, it supports homeless and, challenged opportunity youth. So if you don't have a Girl Scout in your life from whom you are buying and you want Girl Scout cookies, there's that link that I popped in to chat.
What do you do with the cookies? I am not supposed to eat the cookies. What do I do with that?
Well, then you might have some trouble if you order them, but give them to people. They actually they do have a program where you can order cookies to be sent overseas to troops.
Really?
Yeah, so just same thing. You just buy them and they also, if you're buying some for yourself,
nice.
a couple packs on. So yeah, I think, the more that we can support programs that keep young women getting their stuff together and giving good exercises for them to practice and so on, like the badge system does, I think the better. I've also tossed in the Rio code in case you need it. And otherwise, just a reminder that last time what we did was our star setting and our flush setting. Let's see if I can bring those over. Oops, I got to zoom in a lot. Pardon the zoom. Come here, little zoom. Where are we? Gotta find my spot. There we go. So we had done the star setting with the gravers, which is the modified bead setting basically. And then we also did our flush setting last time. Did a couple of those, I think. And so if you have been practicing them, great. Probably if you've been practicing them, your first ones look really scratched up around the edges. Don't be freaked out by that. Just remember that some of it can be polished out, and every one you do, you'll get better and better at. So your goal is a nice clean circle around the stone, not a lot of scratch marks outside of it, is what we're aiming for. And so that was a big part of what the graver settings included was the star setting, and previously we'd done that stitch setting. Again, stitch setting, I'm not a huge fan of. Bead setting, I like a little bit more. It's a little more stable than the stitch setting, but you can play around with what you got. Hey, Alan, nice to see your face. So today, I'm going to show you a whole boatload of tools. Let me zoom back out. Oh, and I got to spotlight myself. I apologize. I always forget that part. Spotlight. There we go. So I'm going to show you a bunch of tools today that we'll be using on today's project, but this is by no means the extent of what goes into waxworking. This is just one particular aspect of waxworking. We're going to be working with hard wax today, which has, through the last few decades, really improved in the modern technology. So this is actually a wax and plastic blend that makes it a lot easier to hold the carvings than some of the early waxes. When I started with waxworking, it was 40-something years ago, and there were a lot of very soft waxes and not a whole lot of the solid hardened waxes. And I hated it, frankly, as a kid. So I didn't think I'd ever come back to it until I had some projects that I wanted to make. I started back in waxworking to make buttons for costuming. So things with like royal crests on them and things like that to add to theatrical costuming. And it's great for that. I do not do my own casting. I send my casting out. I have neither the safety equipment nor the inclination. I frankly find it kind of boring. I like the part about creative and less about production. So that your mileage may vary. You may have a casting set up and want to do your own. I know a lot of jewelers do. For some reason, it seems more prevalent on the West Coast than it does on the East Coast that people have their own casting setups, which is just sort of odd to me that has patterns to it. Maybe there's more casting houses in New York, so people just send them off. I don't know. You have theories on that?
That's the reason.
Yeah, that's the reason. Yeah, a lot of the big houses are in Rhode Island and New York. What few of them are left these days. So because we are using the hardened wax and not the softer waxes in this particular case, mostly what we'll be doing is deductive. We'll be taking away from the wax. When I'm working in soft waxes, I tend to do a lot of additive work. So I start with some thin sheet wax and then build up on it, carve away shapes and so on. But with this, some of the tools we have are detailed hand carving tools, which have a wide array amongst them, including a lot of dental tools. So if you go to your dentist on a regular basis and you can ask them, hey, do you have any worn out tools? They will have properly sanitized them after each use anyhow, and it can get you some free wax working tools. So a lot of these are either based on dental tools or are actual dental tools. These two in particular, you probably had your teeth scraped with these, depending on whether you're old enough to have actual scrapings and not water pick scrapings these days. And then I also like to use, this is my favorite hard wax cheapo set. It's literally the local craft store's $5 or $10 pack of cheap wood carving tools. Because if it can carve through wood, it can sure as heck carve through wax. And this is good for the coarse carving, meaning like take big chunks away at a time. So I use this more than just about any other tools when I'm working. But then once you get into fancier, more detailed carving, you can get to these delightful but very pricey wolf carving tools. These are especially good if you end up doing lathe work, which is super fun, super messy, and a little addictive, but it also has the limitation of it has to be spinning to get it, you know, then you may take it off of the lathe and work on it in greater detail. I realize I'm seeing myself in my own screen and it's freaking me out a little bit. So these come in, there's two different size kits of this. There's a basic and then there's a fancier, like I think this is 20 or 30 tools, and they each have different tips to them. And different purposes. And if you ever get to take a workshop with the amazing Kate Wolf, it is worth every penny. She is incredibly generous with the information she provides and super fun to take a class from. And it's very intense. One of the things that is a little challenging to me is the first class I took with her, she did not want us taking notes. She wanted us watching the screen. She had a big screen on hand, which I have the short-term memory of a gnat. So that was really challenging for me. But man, it was super fun to do the lathe work with her. And she's done carving of both jewelry objects and tangibles like small craft objects and so on as well, for years. She used to work for, not the Danbury Mint, because that's who I worked for. She used to work for one of the big mints that makes those little commemorative like statues and car miniatures and things like that. And so she did a lot of their design work on their metals collections. Beyond that, we're going to be using some basic mandrels and some slightly fancier ones. This has a cutting edge to scrape out the wax. There are a lot of folks who work on a metal mandrel because they would be using heat and getting the wax flowing and would stuff it onto the mandrel. I'm not going the route of using heat today because this is a fairly straightforward carve that we're going to do. Obviously, you're going to need measuring tools if you're going for precision. Going to use our saw, but we're using wax blades, which if you've never looked at a wax blade close up, it's this spiral of spiky teeth. I don't know that I can get close enough to make a difference to see this, but we'll see. Let's see if my zoom will get us. There you go. Yeah, we can. Whoop, too close. So can you see that spiral a little bit in there? And it's very catchy. It's very coarse because anything we do with files or with drill bits or whatever, if we were using our traditional metal bits and blades, they would definitely gum up from the wax we're using. So all of the tools you'll see are much coarser. I've got sets of files that are so coarse you can see the bitiness of the teeth, right? Because these don't get as clogged as we're doing the work. I'm not saying you can't use the others, but you're going to spend days cleaning your files if you do, and it'll drive you a little mad because they won't work very long because they'll get so clogged. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, we also have coarser drill bits that we can use to carve away in larger chunks. And we're going to use a little bit of, in this case, it's Kate's, but you can use, oops, where's my screen? There we go, into the screen, Rachel. Left, right, which way are we going? So very coarse bits. I can't get into my screen. Where am I going? There we go. So super choppy, not good to work on metal with, but good for the wax-work. And then even our sandpaper is a different sandpaper. We're using, this sandpaper is basically, it's for doing plaster work when you're doing patching your walls and so on. So wall boarding sandpaper, because again, nice coarse texture to it so that while it will clog over time, it's not going to stay clogged as we clean up our waxwork. There's lots and lots of other tools as we get into finer waxworking. If you're super interested at the end of this class, you could still come out to Portland. We've got space in that in-person waxworking class I'm going to do. And that one is going to be a sampler of a bunch of different techniques. But broadly, you can do this at home without even a full studio. Like, I don't need all of these tools. I could get away with some of the simplest and get some good basic carving out there. It's a matter of your patience and time to get the work done. But this is really, like, I describe this to people as an entry portal to jewelry, even if you don't have your own studio, because you can do it sitting watching TV in your living room, because it doesn't have to have the fancy bench. Any questions about any of those tools I just flew past?
Is there a name for the drill bit or whatever bit you were showing?
So these are specifically wax burrs. These are, in fact, I think these are also, yeah, they're Kate Wolf's. So they're just wolf burrs. If you want some part numbers, there's a bunch of different sizes and shapes. So this is a
I just want the one you're going to use.
I'm going to use, well, I'm using several different ones, depending on where we get to in the project and the scale of it. I just pulled two of my basic ones, which is a round, a ball burr. That's a very coarse one. And the Rio part number for that is 345026. It's a wolf round burr. This one is 3.5 millimeters, but it comes in a bunch of different sizes. I have, you know, 5 or 6 sizes of it. And then the other one is a cylinder burr. I'm going to see how this does. This is actually a metal burr, but it's a coarse metal burr. So I'm hoping I'll be able to use it for some of my interior carving. So I'll tell you how it works, or you'll see how it works as we go through this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then the files you can get as a set. I think Rio sells them. Pretty much anybody sells them, but if you find files for plastic work, if you find files for you might find some coarse enough rasps in the woodworking section, but really not this fine. Like, these are both delicate files and coarse at the same time, and you'll see how much
think, the hobby supply shop has.
Yeah,
I have a pair here.
These I think I got these wood carving tools at a Dick Blick's when I first bought them. I think that's where the set comes, and this is actually 2 sets stuffed in here. It's a kit of 5 or 6, yeah, 5 pieces. There's 2 that I use in particular. There's a slightly curved piece for some long narrow troughs, and then there's a triangle cutting one, sort of a groove that cuts in, and I use this a ton for starting lines on things. The ones that look like flat blades, less so, and then the chisels sort of mid-range use. Any other questions before I dig in? Okay, if you're following along in the... Sorry, go ahead.
Where does the heat lamp come in?
For this project, I'm not going to be using one, the alcohol lamp. Yeah. Alcohol lamps would be, so I might go back at the end of it and use it just for a light melt coat on it, which sort of smooths things out. It'll depend on how much polish I feel I need to put on it. There's extensive stuff we could talk about in a waxworking class specifically about finishing pieces. Some people like to do a rough finish and then polish when they get it back, because there's already going to be some porosity and so on you have to take out of your casting and work past it. Other people like it perfectly shiny, glistening, like as clean as they can, because if I leave a fingerprint in my wax, it's going to come out in the casting. It's going to be there. So every mark we leave on it is going to be part of our cast. But yeah, so an alcohol lamp would be for that. Or if we were doing some of the additive work, I would be using bits of wax and getting them melting and adding to the work and so on. And there's tools like I have an entire, do I have it out? No, it's tucked away because I'm ready for the class. There's a set of power tools where it's basically a knife point or a poker point that heats up to different temperatures depending on the wax you're using. And you use that to attach pieces together and so on. There's a whole lot to be learned about when you're connecting wax to other wax, making sure you've cleared any bubbles in it. And it depends on whether you're molding it or whether you're casting it directly. And so there's all kinds of complexities to that. But that is not what we're aiming for. We're aiming for a basic, here we're carving a ring in order to have one for John's particular Roman setting. And if you're following along in the book, we are on about page 150, where is it? 153, 152 and 153-ish. And we're going to make a pretty basic ring. I might, if we get far enough, I might do some extra decorative stuff just to fancy it up. Okay, so for this project, either a round or an oval, his example uses an oval, so I scrounged until I found an oval stone. And this particular style tends to be a heavier ring, usually. It tends to be sort of a men's ring intended, big, bulky, fairly straightforward ring. Doesn't mean you have to do that. You could do this with a small round, but remember, because of the way that this setting happens, we're going to be forcing a lot of material around it. So I wouldn't do a terribly delicate stone with this, and give yourself enough bulk that you can really work with it. Another thing that I noticed as I was trying to pick my stones, because I do not have a whole lot of traditional oval or round cabs sitting around, is I have some cabs that have sort of an angled side instead of a curved side. And my gut tells me that given the way that we're pressing down the material on this, that those would either have to be so deep that the material would come up over the flat, or they wouldn't hold as well from the push that we're doing. So I picked a curved sided stone in this case for my example, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is rough mark it for having some room all the way around, because I need to have the material that I'm going to push, which means I could go either way, but that's going to be a really tall ring by the time I'm done, or high up on the finger. So I'm going to just go this direction with this stone, and I'm going to give myself a little extra room. I'm going to come to about here and give myself a squaring up line. So all I'm doing first is rough cutting my base material. Helps if I get it a little more square than that. I packed my good square. Where did I put the other one? A little straighter. And I'm going to mark it down from there so I can watch as I'm carving. I mean, watch as I'm sawing, just to give myself some guides. And then using that wax blade, I'm going to just cut the rough cut out of this. You probably want to have your bench tray cleaned out of silver scrap and so on before you do this, because this creates garbage and wax dust like nobody's business. It is a fairly straightforward cut once you get started. It's easy to go off track because it's soft material and we get used to how metal responds. So slow and steady wins the race, but you'll see all of this powder that comes off is just the plastic bits. And I'm going to actually mark my line with the saw, a little bit of a channel all the way around to try and guide my cut a little better, because I tend to go a little wonky when I'm cutting straight through something.
Rachel, are those blades numbered like regular blades?
Yeah, not that I've seen. I've only
Okay.
seen one size, and they're just called
Okay.
wax. Might be nice to have a couple different thicknesses of them. And these plastic / wax blocks come in a variety of different sizes. I chose to use the one that has the flat top because it'll make this cut easier, but you can get plain rounds, which are used a lot in that the lathe work as a good starting point. You can get bracelet sized and shaped pieces. You can even get bracelets that are half hollowed out inside already. So what you're doing is building off of the bracelet form. And then, of course, you can get good solid chunks of it. And the wax comes in different colors, which are different brittlenesses, or, you know, some of them are squishier, or not squishier. It's in the hard waxes, it's sort of, some of them have more brittleness, but hold a pattern better. Others are softer and have more carving attributes. To me, the green of, these are matte wax, MATT is the brand. The green is a like happy medium of the carvability and the not too brittle. Blue goes more brittle and red goes more soft in this collection. There are also companies that make colored ones that are like silver and gold base color, so that if you're showing it to your customer, they can kind of, the theory was that they could kind of see it in the material that you're going to be working in, but it just looks like gray and gold plastic. So I've got my rough. And one of the things I want to do is make sure I even up the sides. And so this is just a rough sanding to make sure I'm flush. And that I've gotten past any of the saw marks I've got put in there from my cut. And I'm going to check for squareness of my corners up at the top, just to make sure I've got a decent fit all the way around. That's looking okay. So I'm also going to take down the marks on the top so they don't confuse me when I'm working on other markings. Doesn't look square to me, even though my square is telling me it's square. It looks a little off. There's something wonky here. Yeah, that side is a little off.
So that sanding paper is for construction, right? You said this is what
it's called wallboarding, or you know, it's for taking the plaster down when you put mud and tape down when you're doing wallboarding in your house. You can get it at Home Depot or Lowe's, or any hardware store will sell it. And then if you want to do a finer sanding of it, get an old nylon stocking. Nylon stocking is one of those ways that I finish a piece. It does a sort of a soft polish to it, kind of a satin finish.
Yeah, I remember that.
But you can see I get a ton of dust from just that little bit of work. That looks a little more square, but still a little off. I'm gonna actually see if I can mark it. It's such a tiny amount off that I'm not sure I can get. Yeah, I just have to keep working at it, I think. That's happier. Okay, so now I've got my top, and one of the things that makes this easier is if I can at least put it on my mandrel to do work. So while I'm not going to do my final sizing of the ring, I am going to take a little bit of material out of the center just to open it up a bit, because I don't need a ring that's that thick, right? I know I'm going to be sizing it to something. You do need to be aware of your sizing and go towards the specific size you want if you're going to be doing a lot of removal of material, because you need to know whether you have enough material on the outside to keep the thickness you need on the inside. This is actually one of my favorite aspects of doing rings, is this little scrapey thing. It's so satisfying to just carve out layers of it in a hurry. And you can use this tool on the exterior as sort of a broad scraper. I have been known to do that, but it's really a fairly singular purpose. You have to switch back and forth, because just like any other mandrel that's tapered, you don't want it to get gouging out more from one side than the other. Okay, but just like that, I'm able to get, it looks a little bit bigger on that side. So just like that, I can get a little bit more room, which means that when I need to, I can put it solidly on my mandrel to do a little bit of work. And that's going to help me hold it while I mark it up for the next step, which is that I need to find my center so that I can position the stone. So if I can figure out where I put my calipers. Oh. Okay, so I've got 21. Of course, it's not a nice even number. Definitely still not perfectly square. And just scratch paper. 21.6 wide by, right now I'm at so I need to have that. I'm gonna have 12.6. Oh. Oh my gosh, I really need one of these that I can do like an Alexa voice to. Alexa, set gauge to.
I already told my brother to design one because he designs for Amazon.
Nice.
So it will have your name if he ever does it.
That would almost be enough to get me an Alexa, but otherwise, not a chance. 12.6, come on. Stay there, and we're just going to do 2 lines. That is definitely not the number I wanted. That's the number I wanted. So I'm going to just do a light scoring, and because I know I'm not terribly exact, I like to score from both sides so that if I'm off by a smidge, I can find the midpoint. That looks pretty solid. And then 10.8, 0.08 on there.
So are you sizing the square to so that you know what the middle point is?
I'm finding the middle. Yeah, I'm marking it out so I can find the middle. One of the things that helps make your waxes look clean is doing as much of this markup as possible to keep it nice and consistent. Really did not do that measurement as well as I did the other one. So oh, because I'm doing my math wrong. It's not that I sized it wrong. It's 10.5. 3 I need. That's better. Okay, so now I have my center point, and I'm actually gonna make that line, I'm gonna follow that line down the sides as well from my center all the way around the ring, because that'll give me something I can work with as I carve down the sides. I'm going to do some shaping to give this a little bit more comfort fit and not be quite such a solid block of a ring. So I have my center point, I'm marking down, and I'm going to do the same down the front in case I want to do any decorative work. Oops, except I've got to use the right measurement. Okay, so I've got basic marks laid out to grid up my piece. Now I am going to put a little bit of sticky wax on the back of my stone, which I'm just using the same sticky wax you guys have seen me use when we're doing the tiny stones and holding them on a wax dop. It's Kate's Wicked Sticky Wax. She's from Maine, so I think that's apropos. Wicked Sticky. Just squishing a bit of it on the stone, and I'm gonna make sure I center it using that mark that I just made. Make sure I've got it nicely aligned, and we're gonna score a mark right up at the stone all the way around. And so this is going to be the outer boundary. Our material that is going to be squishing down onto the stone is going to be just outside of this. But we need to make a point at which we can set it. So basically we're working in reverse of the way we build up when we're building a step bezel, right? So we're taking away to make that. Let me make this mark a little deeper. So that's my outer perimeter that I've put in there. And I'm going to dig down a good ways, just so that I don't lose that. And you can always touch up your mark. If you start sanding below this for something, you can always come back and groove it deeper. You just got to do it before you run out of material to work with. And so John has asked us, he suggests 1 millimeter to 1.5 millimeters. If we think about it, that is equivalent to what he taught us in the step bezel layer, in which when we're putting, he said we don't need more than 1 millimeter or so of thickness holding the stone when it's resting. So what we're doing by making an inner circle is creating what will be the layer that becomes the seat of the stone. So we're going to basically have a line right in, oops, too thick, a little thinner than I've got it marked out, but we're going to have a line dug down into this, and then everything inside of it will take away, right? So we're making the mark next for how far am I going in from the outer perimeter. So we're going to do 1 millimeter, which I think is probably going to be easier on my regular dividers, but let's see. 1 to 1.5. So I'm going to give myself a little leeway and do the 1.5. I can always take more away. It's a pain in the butt to add back in. Right, so what I'm doing here is marking based on my other, yeah, it's going to be much easier with my small calipers. I'm in my dividers. So using the outer ring as my guide, I'm marking my inner circle or oval in this case. And there's a certain amount of shrinkage that goes on from wax to casting. If you are going to ask me how much, the answer is it depends. It depends on the wax you're using. It depends on what kind of mold material is being used. It depends on the metal that is being used for the casting. There's a whole lot of factors. It can be as little as 2 or 3%, and it can be as much as 6 or 10%, depending on all those combos. So you have to know ahead of time what your plans are for it, or know that you're going to spend some time sizing things. So you err on being able, whatever your design is, you're going to want to be able to stretch it or otherwise manipulate it.
That's the tough part.
Go ahead. What was that?
I think that's the tough part because I never could learn the calculating how much investment or how much shrinkage or all of that.
That would be one of the reasons I send my castings out. There's a whole lot of stuff you have to keep track of and be prepared for. And frankly, a lot of the materials used in casting are pretty terrible for your lungs. And so if you don't have really good safety equipment, really good ventilation, you got to be super careful with that. The particulates used in investment in particular are really, really not good for you. Okay, so I've now got my double layer. Let me zoom in so you guys can see what I've got marked out a little bit more. Come on, focus. No focus. Okay, we'll back out a little bit. There we go. So I've got my center mark, and I've got my outer ring and my inner ring marked up. And you can see I've also made those side marks just to give myself guides down the road when we're doing the rest of the carving. Questions so far? Okay. Next step, let me back out a little bit. Oop, wrong way. Having this camera over to this side of me is really weird. I'm not used to it. Next up is to start by drilling a hole smack dab in the middle, because we're going to work away a lot of that center material. I'm going to put it on here, and no, I'm going to not put it on there because I'm going to drill through if I do that. I'm using a fairly coarse drill bit just because, again, don't want to clog it. There's no special drill bits for straight up putting a hole in something. Just know that it may gunk up. Go slowly so you don't get melted wax all over your good drill bits. But otherwise, it's about as straightforward a hole making process as you can. I'm going to attempt to use, I want to get a little bit started with the hand carving tools, and then I'm going to come back and try the various burrs that I've got. So here's a case where my cheapo woodworking tools really do well for me, because I can just start digging inside of my inner ring. And it doesn't take a lot of pressure. Think of this as sort of the wax version of using the graver. We're not trying for a lot of forward pressure, just enough to catch the material. And it's, again, one of the reasons I like the green wax is that it doesn't chip on me the way the blue wax does, and it doesn't go gummy on me the way the red wax does. But you'll find your correct brand, whichever version you like, and maybe use a mix of them. They all can work together, and it's not mutually exclusive. But different people have different preferences. There's a purple wax in one of the brands that I think a lot of people like, but I can't remember what brand name that one is. So what I want to do is just get my first pass so that I have something to grip. And I think I'm going to drill, sort of carve a hole bigger in here. So right now my goal is take material away from the center. So you can see that my blade will act as a kind of a drill bit to punch through based on that hole that I made at the beginning. You can also use, I use my X-Acto blades all the time when I'm doing this. You know, a good X-Acto knife can carve and shape a lot. But now I want to see how my various bits will work with this. I think it's been a while since I've done any burr carving. And I'm going to start with the barrel burr. Get in there right now. Yeah. Oh, I got to get a little more out of the way first, but we'll see if that helps us out.
Rachel,
Yeah.
you had mentioned a purple wax. It's like the same as the green wax.
It's kind of like the way when you buy your gold from different suppliers, they have their own proprietary blend. There's a company that makes a red, purple, and I can't remember what their third or four, they may even have 4 colors, and they're all differing degrees of response. Some people like waxes that are very malleable. Some people like waxes that are very crisp. Like the blue waxes will have a much crisper line when you cut into it, but it's also more likely to chip parts away that you don't want if you hit it wrong. So to me, the green is in the middle. Purple is the middle one of another brand name than the matte waxes, but I'm not remembering off the top of my head. Maybe it's one of the Contenti lines. I can't remember. And also, by the way, one of the companies that used to be one of my favorites got merged in. There's Matt and no, not Kerr. There were 2 companies that I only recently realized they're still selling under both brand names, but they're actually owned by the same parent company, so it kind of doesn't matter anymore. And the purple wax may have been one of those.
Is it called Ferris?
Yes, thank you.
F-E-R-R-I-S?
Ferris and Matt are now owned by the same company.
Okay, because I have some, so I was wondering.
And I use Ferris for almost all my wire wax. They make amazing wires and even some pre-formed bezel setting wire and things like that. Let's see if that's the right size. There we go. Good. All right, so now I'm just going to use this to sort of work my whole center area out a little bit at a time. But frankly, I could do this all by hand too, because this is a lot messier than when I was doing it by hand. I'm just widening the hole, being careful not to go beyond the inner markings that I made. The only downside to doing this in your living room is you'll find wax for days, and if you have pets, they will have it all over their fur. I don't let my cats in the room when I'm doing wax. So the burrs are nice because they can you can keep a nice straight wall, more controlled than maybe carving away will get you by hand. And it's fast. Ooh, I almost went too far on that one. I gotta be a little more careful.
I have some, but they're old.
Say again?
I have some wax.
Yep.
When I used to do my sculptures.
Nice.
And the other company is called K-E-R-R.
Kerr is, yeah. So Kerr is the company that makes one of the primary dental tools for wax. So we overlap our tools with the dental industry. When you get a cap made or whatever, they're doing it with these same waxes, and we share tools. We share carving tools. We share some of the heating tools. So Kerr is a great company, although these days I probably wouldn't recommend their heating tools. They are not the top of the line on the market anymore. They're a little more fragile than some of the more modern brands. I think Rio actually got into making their own version specifically because they had enough complaints about a decade or 2 ago, not a decade, about 15 years ago, probably. All right, so I now have my base material taken out of the way. And I'm going to show you with the stone in place. Remember, we're still leaving that lip behind that will hold it. But we're also, can I get that at an angle you guys can see? Not very well. Let's see. Also, you're going to have to trust me that you can see through to the stone from where we've just carved out. And that's going to even be more the case once we get this positioned. So next up is to actually start to make that lip. And John shows a couple different things that he's using in here. He's using the burrs. He's doing some of it by hand. The thing that's a little confusing about his pictures where they are is when you get to page 155, the things that he's showing carving away are after the wax has been cast. So what he's pointing out is that no matter what, you're going to also have some metal working cleanup to do. You'll use your setting burr to touch things up and so on. But to point out, if we were doing a faceted stone, we would do a little bit more work on the levels that we're about to go cutting in, because we would need to make both that flat level and a little bit of the angle for the facets to angle down the stone. So we're just basically building our step bezel logic in reverse in this, because we're digging down instead of building up to it. Make sense? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to use, because my coarse tools are a little too coarse for this, I'm going to switch over to some of Kate's more delicate tools, because if I've got them, I may as well use them. So she's got a nice little straight up, oops, that's not the sharp one though, I need the sharp one. Oh, where's my other flat tool? Oh, I like this corner one. So she has this one that's a little sharp puller, like it's got a cut to it, but it goes this way so you can control it, kind of like you're doing carrot peeling. So I really like this one for the small scrapes because I have a little more control digging in. Oops, but I've got a little bit too wide of a bit there. I'm going to pull out my files and do a little cleanup filing on one section of this, my round file. Flat, I guess round is my go-to. I think I may have lost my curved sided wax file. So the wax files, they're super coarse. They take away, they sort of grind up whatever you're working on. So I try to use them as little as possible. But I've got just this tiny smidge of extra material at the ends of my oval. I didn't go quite close enough to my mark. So I want to clean that up a little bit before I do this carving down. And obviously, I'm doing the fast version of all of this. I would be slowing this down at each step and really taking my time, get more precise with it. It's much like metalworking. Every mark we make on it that we don't want there, we have to clean up later. So go with care. Just about extra material at that end, but we'll take care of it in a little bit. And when you're not up on a computer screen talking to a bunch of people while you do this, this can become pretty meditative. That's one of the things I have grown to like about the hard wax carving. You have to pay a little more attention to the small detail when you're doing the soft wax, because the heat of your hands can change the shape of it and so on. So it's a little more focused. But this gets to be kind of a Zen process. And I'm going to dig down pretty far because I'm ultimately going to want to carve away a lot of the material. This is a fairly thick top, and I don't need that much on my ring. I'm probably going to take about 1 millimeter or so off, maybe a little more by the time I'm done. But this is giving me the guidance, and I can always dig down deeper as I go. Let's see if I have any tools from Kate that I like better.
So are you trying to avoid not touching the extra millimeter that you added on the wax?
the other way around. I'm only working the millimeter. I'm trying to dig
Okay.
down. So you mean the ring? So I'm digging, I'm not going beyond my outer ring. I only want to touch my inner ring when I'm carving down in this. I'm just trying to find which of the tools are working best for this particular bit of carving.
Okay. Okay, I get it now.
These are all white that I want. Too straight.
But we're still in page 153.
Yes, 152 and 153. And John uses burrs for a bunch of it. We did the burr for the first part of it. I don't have small enough burrs to get this clean line, so I need to get it dug in with tools. And once we get a little ways in, we'll be able to set the stone down and you'll see what I'm building here. And the nice thing is that because even though we're doing this as reductive carving, I can add wax back if I screw it up. In fact, my instructor who got me back into wax working almost drove me away from it because she threatened to do what her instructors did, which is as you're almost done with your, I've been working on it for 10 hours carving, she would snap the piece in half and make you repair it so that you learned how to do the fixes.
Oh no.
I threatened her with bodily harm if she did. Ain't got no time for that. I can break stuff on my own.
I think that's kind of mean.
Yeah, but I understand why. Because so the problem happens when you're doing a wax and you're connecting multiple pieces. It's really easy to introduce air bubbles. And so what she wanted us to be able to do, which I then, once I understood what she wanted me to do, I promised her and then did go practice with for the activity she was describing. What she wanted us to be able to do is use the heat tools to properly reconnect. And there's a trick for how you draw wax from other parts of the project or how you add wax to get it to fill those gaps so that it casts well. So I've got one side that has a wonky chip to it that I got to figure out how I can get it cleaner because it's carving badly. Oops, I'm not plugged in on my laptop. Give me a second. Plug in, battery. There we go. Running out of battery. You guys can still see me?
Yeah, we can see
Yes.
you.
Thank you. All right, so I'm just at this stage getting a fairly sloppy first pass of a ledge that is going to be the seat for the stone. I've got one little chunk though that's chipping away more than the rest of it, which is annoying. Let's see if I can improve that any. There can be, imperfections in the wax that you buy and things like that. But again, that's why we learn how to repair and fix and patch the spots if we need to. So first I'm going to zoom in so you can see how coarse this is at this stage. So I'm really literally just starting a ledge. And again, I've got lots of room to dig. Come back here. Where am I going? There we go.
Okay.
So the stone will soon set down in there. It's almost there. I've got a little bit of extra material over here. But what our goal is to get it below the point where we're going to be able to push down our metal around it, right? And then we also have to take into account how our design is going to lay out. One of the things that is challenging to me when I do this is that you often want to work on making your model as light as possible while still being structurally sound, which often means carving away material from the backside too, and hollowing it out. That is always a challenge for me. Invariably, I'll go through my ring from the backside or whatever. So it's very frustrating. But again, we got to get our base down first. Where is... So the tool I'm using is a pretty straight blade from Kate, and it doesn't even actually have much blade to it. It's almost just a blocked piece of metal. It's less blade-like than some of her other tools. And I am going to start now. Go ahead. What was that?
How are you determining the depth of that seat?
Right now, I'm not even bothering. I'm just continuing to dig down because I have so much material to get through. I'm going to actually control that by taking more material away off the top. I could alternatively have done my estimating and started to take material off the top before I started carving. But I know my penchant for over carving, and so I want to leave myself plenty of material. And then when we're talking about how much overall, he has a good description of it. Where is it? So up on top of page 152 on the right-hand side, determining the depth.
I'm reading where it is on 154 on the right-hand side. So that was why I asked my question.
On 154.
Once you have adjusted the rim heights, blah, 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 blah.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, that's what we are in the process of doing that. Back on page 152, he talks about aiming for a couple of 2 to 3 millimeters of total height, I think. Let me see if I've got the right spot. Depending on the size of the stone, plan on a minimum of 3 or more millimeters of thickness, more for larger or high profile stones. So you can carve deeply. So we need good thickness here. So I've got more than 3 millimeters here, and I'm going to be working relative to that and carving down to it a bit. So I am now working on taking smaller strokes with each pass of the tool to try and work some consistency, because right now I've got that first pass is a little lumpy. I'm trying to get some consistency into my surface. And again, I happen to be using this shape tool. You guys may find something that works better for you, or you may invest in burrs that give you, you can get the angle cut setting burrs, and depends on what you're aiming to do with yours. I tend to teach how to do waxworking with cheap tools because it can get expensive really quickly if you invest in all the variations. This wax itself is not toxic to you, so you don't have to, you notice I'm not wearing a mask or anything. Although the dust can get everywhere and get annoying. So I'm looking forward to trying this setting because I've never actually done the full effect of a Roman setting. And I suspect I'm going to be counting on my hammer hand piece a bit. He shows us doing it by hand, and so maybe I'm going to try to do it by using the hammer tools. And I really like, he has 2 versions of how he sets this. I really like the one that uses the domed or the curved setting tool and creates a ring around it before pushing it up over the piece, or into the piece, I guess more accurately. I want to see how that looks in the act of doing it. I just don't know if I have the hand strength to work the metal, because this is some seriously thick metal that we're going to be using for setting. And the goal of it is really, it's sort of compressing it. That's not the same as other settings where we're pushing the material up and over. It's really about the downward pressure creating a pinch in. It's actually more like, and the reason it's in this is because it's the flush setting. It's more like the flush setting, in which we are pushing our material around and into and hardening it around the edge of the stone. It's just writ large by comparison to those little faceted stones we were working with. There are all kinds of other ways to set stones in wax carved pieces, up to and including, there's a lot of, not a lot, there are several stones that can endure being cast in place, quality diamonds and sapphires being among them. So one of the cool things when you do start working with the heat tools is that you can actually, basically you put your stone where you want it on top of your wax, and you heat the stone using the heat tool, and it starts to send the heat through to the wax exactly where the stone is positioned, and it basically melts in the support system for the stone. It's a really cool process. Right, so we're starting to get a little cleaner. I still got a couple of lumps that are not making me terribly happy. And this becomes a progressively more delicate move every time. You know, we did our first coarse pass. As we're trying to neaten it up, we get to tiny little scratches and scrapes at the wax, so that we're taking just a little bit away at a time. And one of the things you may see me doing is I'm also going up and around my side rim to try and keep it square to the work that I'm doing on the step. I always have to remind myself to slow down on this. So we're starting to get low enough that we can see how it fits the stone. Right? The stone is starting to rest in there instead of on top of it, but there's definitely a ways more we can dig down.
Rachel,
Mm-hmm.
so when you begin making the seat for the stone,
Yep.
you still haven't thought about aesthetically it's going to have flowers or lines, or this is just the whole.
This is the hole for it. So John's way of going about this, although keep in mind, John is making the most basic traditional ring in his example. So it really is just about putting a final shape to it. He's not doing decorative. He's going with the classic Roman setting, which is a lump of stone on top of a lump of metal, right? It's got a little bit of form to keep it comfortable on the finger. So in his case, he's described, yeah, get all of this ready and place it, and then work the rest of your design. And frankly, anything that has a stone in it, I would probably really make sure I know where it's going and that I have enough material before I get into that. Or I would be planning on doing something additive where I would build the setting on top later. But because this is a complete removal of the wax, it's really starting with where are we putting the stone, and then we'll design around it.
If you want.
If you want, yeah. Yeah, your wax doesn't have to have stonework. It's just that's the exercise we're doing for this chapter of the book.
Well, that's why it's called the Roman setting, I
Right.
imagine.
Very basic, yeah, very straightforward. I mean, they didn't have the tools that we have. They certainly didn't have plasticine-based or plastic-based wax.
Is it related to signet ring?
I think so. Anybody have thoughts on that? Alan, you know the history of Roman style rings relative to signet rings?
I've never heard the term before.
The Roman style setting?
No, I don't know what that is.
Oh, okay. It's ultimately, some people still call it a gypsy setting, but there's so much conflict over that and over there being variations. It's pushing down heavy metal from the outside edge. So we're going to be compressing a ring of material around the edge in order to hold a larger stone pushed down in. So it's
You do a
not.
good job. I can see that, but I've got a question.
Yeah,
I see that you have a tattoo on your hand.
I do.
What
It's
language is it in?
Sanskrit.
And would you share with us what it says?
In its simplest form, it translates to breathe. It's in my mudra position for when I'm theoretically doing yoga. I say theoretically because it's been a long time. Or when I'm driving, so I remember not to get angry. I've got my hands on the wheel. It's got a slightly longer definition than that, but it sums up to remember to breathe.
Well, it sums up to what?
Remember to breathe.
Remember to breathe. Okay, great.
Yeah. It's wordier and fancier than that in the real translation, but that's the gist. It was the first tattoo I wanted and the third one I got because I work in business dealings every day and I worried about having a tattoo on my hand.
Thanks.
So signet rings, I think the traditional, more boxy signet ring is kind of an offshoot of this. These are much earlier, this style, than the common signet rings. And then there's bishop's rings, which are in there. And bishop's rings are the ones that a lot of people, in fact, I think Alan's book has a variation on a bishop's ring, the one where you're building it from the outside and bringing it together to create the hollow form with the setting at the top. There's another name for bishop's ring, but I can't remember. Alan, what's the one in your book that you're doing that way? What do you call it? You know what I'm talking about? The one that has the template that has two ends that come together.
It's called, let's see, what is it called? I just happen to have a copy of the book here.
Funny that.
Okay, hold on a second.
And gang, if you weren't on in the early days of this series, one of the things that helped me spark the idea of doing the Cogswell book this way is that Alan has a great Facebook group where you can sort of play along at home across his book, all the projects.
There it is. Can you see it?
I have you in tiny screen, so I can't. Yeah, that's the ring I'm talking about. I know that as a bishop's ring because it was one of the traditional rings that was only allowed for priesthood when it first was developed.
I'm having a hard time hearing everything you're saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm saying that the way that I was taught, what I was taught that was called is a bishop's ring. That particular comes up to a single stone, and I think that's a next generation. It's somewhere between this Roman style ring and more recent signet rings. So it's sort of an evolution, Wendy, is my guess. And then it became indicative of scholarship and things like that. So, the class rings came out of that. And so they're all sort of tied together somehow in history. Okay, I'm getting nice and deep with this. So let's see where the stone is sitting. Oh, a little bit more at one end that needs to come off. Just have the stone backwards. Yeah, I'm not setting fully down into what I've carved. So I need to go a little bit more cleanly around the edges.
Now, shouldn't you be working already with heat? Will that make no?
Nope. So heat is actually a little harder to control because it's changing the form that you're working on, like under you're not as controlled with it. Some people like to heat these tools because it gives them a smoother look off the top, but I tend to not go to heat until I'm doing final cleanup of it. You absolutely don't need to. Not when you're working with this kind of wax anyway. I use heat with the soft waxes regularly.
Thank you.
But this is just like, it's very much like people who do fine wood carving. There's a lot of crossover in the tools. There's a lot of, or at least structural crossover. It may not be the exact same tools. There's a lot of principles that are the same. So if you're good at one, you may be able to get quite good at the other. But we're just taking away material. And if I would use the heat if I were trying to add some decorative elements. So let's say I carve a lot away from this and I realize I want to add a vine element with some leaves. My choice would be either carve it in from the beginning, deductive work, or once I have the frame, then adding some wax to it to build it up in just the spots I want. There again, with waxworking, there are lots of ways to tackle a problem.
So Rachel, getting back to
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Alan's post. Alan, I responded on your site this morning.
To what?
One of the girls had posted something on his site and it was really cool. She started one of the new projects.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. She's doing a good job.
The project that I'm most intrigued by in your book, Alan, is that one where you're doing the chain that is made of coils of links. I haven't had a chance to try that one, but man, it looks super cool. It looks sort of watch band like, but also really modern, sinuous chain. I love it. I'm digging down inconsistently on the ends, so I got to take a little more material away. And again, perfection isn't necessarily required. Some work is easier to clean up once you get it back from casting, but you'll also be paying for metal that you're taking away. So, you know, you're working in gold or platinum. You want to have as precise as you can get. What were you going to ask, Sonia?
Oh, I want to know where's the metal that is going to hold the stone? Where are you going to push it down?
Yeah, so this is a funky one to consider because it really is kind of the reverse of what we've been doing for setting. So this is going to be the material that's pushing down around the stone. See the blue mark around it?
Yeah.
Let me zoom in and show you the relative work that we're doing here. Come on, focus for me. So we've been carving down to make our shelf, to make our seat. Yep. And then we're doing it out to the edge of the stone. So if I were to carve this thinly around that, I would have a wall and you would recognize it as a bezel, right? But what we're going to be doing is creating what's going to be a thick wall around it, a super thick wall. And we're going to be, let me draw this one because it is really hard to conceptualize the idea of compressed metal being all that's doing its job.
And by hand, I'm not thinking about, how am I going to do that by hand?
Right. Yeah. Ooh, wrong side of the, where do I want to be? I got to zoom out a little bit for the drawing. There we go. Okay. So we are going to have ultimately something sort of like that, right? When we get done, our ring is going to probably come in a little bit so that there's some nice shape to it.
Can you move, Rachel, can you move it down or up or more centered
a little to your right?
How's that?
There you go.
Put my light
looks like a tooth.
Yeah. So, so the stone is going to be sitting here, right? Tucked inside this very thick metal here.
Yeah.
And what we're going to be doing with the hammer and the setting tool is I'm going to do this in a separate color because it'll make more sense if I do. We're going to be hammering down and compressing the material in a little, not quite channel, but a deep press down right here. So that's going to change the profile of this to do that. And meanwhile, it's also going to create inward pressure, right? So we're ultimately, this is going to end up leaning onto the stone, and it's so thick that we don't have to quite make it push over the way that we do with the others. And this is an exaggerated version of this, gang. This is going to be the tiniest of little divots, so much so that it'll just look like a decorative element around the outside of the stone. So when we look at it from the top, there's our stone. There's this tiny little ridge of push down, sort of here. And then there's still material outside of it, right? So we're just trying to get enough pressure downward and inward on that layer that this material is all forced in. It is really the same principle as what we did with our flush setting. And that's why I think John has it in this chapter. Because if you think about it, when we do our faceted setting, which this wax carving could be done for a faceted stone, by the way, if you didn't catch that. So when we're doing this with our flush set, right, and it would be in thicker material than that because we don't want the colette pointing out. But when we're doing that, we're pushing down right here and spiral, spinning around,
Right.
and we're doing that same exact push to push this little bit of material up. It's just a much smaller scale where our activity pushes it up and over and work hardens it at the same time. Like some of this hammer setting is going to be work hardening it into place so that it can't move. We're kind of setting it in cement when we do the Roman setting. Like we're putting the metal so thick and so compressed around it that it can't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's kind of primitive.
Kind of connecting?
No, kind of primitive.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's one of the earliest settings in the book. It's the Roman setting, right?
Yeah.
But think about it. This was done with none of the tools we have today, right? So they were making their tools. They were working their metal from scratch, all kinds of things that we don't have the benefit of. Where did I put my tool that was working? My little scraper. Uh-oh, put it down, and now I can't find it. Basic scraper. There's my squared up scraper. Did I put it somewhere other than in front of me?
When you reached in for your pen, could you put it in your drawer?
I might have. That was a good question, but no. Right. Let's see. Not that one. Not that one. I'm going to put away the ones that it's not. That will help. Have one in there if I need it. One. There of those. Not that one. There it is. Clean up and it shall appear. All right. So she often has the same type of cutting tool in multiple sizes in the kit, in the larger kit. The small kit sort of has one of the basics for everything. So I'm using the smallest, which is conveniently just about the size of the seat we're making. I can probably thin out my seat a bit. This is a lot of material in here still. Let's see how far down we're going right now. Okay, we're almost there in terms of height, except that because I have so much material, I want to keep digging a little further so that I can take a little more material off the top when I'm there. I just don't want this solid chunk of a ring. I'm going to be casting in silver primarily because it's the metal I'm most comfortable with, unless somebody wants to give me a grant to do this in gold. And you can also, you can get cast in bronze, platinum. Platinum has some special challenges if you want to do any soldering to it, in that it needs a oxygen-free environment to get a good solder. Not impossible, I'm told, but I can't afford to work in platinum, so I'm only
I
passing
wonder
on.
what would happen with argentium.
So I don't know about casting argentium. The brittleness thing is, I mean, I think brittleness in argentium is related to overheating it, and I don't know what that means for casting. Have you taken any classes with anyone who specializes in it, who they say they cast?
No, I was just thinking,
It'd be nice because then it doesn't have the tarnish, quite the tarnish factor that a sterling does. I have done, the only metal that I've done out of the normal, everyday metals for casting is pewter. And only a few casting houses still do pewter. But it's a fun way to make objects much less expensively than the other metals. A lot of houses will do a bronze, brass, some copper, although a lot of places say copper, you need to have a minimum quantity because it's not worth their effort to do just individual casts. It's too expensive to set it all up. But pewter was fun. I did a cast project for a charitable organization. There's a gang of motorcycle riders that do a charity ride for one of the children's hospitals out in Ohio. And they wanted to be able to give all the members of the ride what's called an angel bell, which, depending on what rider you ask, is either a sign that you're a bad motorcyclist and you need protection, or it's a nice gift to protect somebody from the spirits of the road. So there's a whole lot of funky tradition to it. And so I designed one they wanted, because the program was specifically for babies. And it's the organization that uses an air balloon as their logo, and I'm blanking on their name. So I made them a little knit hat like babies are given in the hospital when they're first born, with the balloon on the front of it. And you could ring it, it made noise when you needed it to. And they made 50 of them or 100 of them, I can't remember. It was a big casting, all in pewter, and gave them out to their riders. And I thought that was a pretty cool project.
Rachel?
Yeah.
Rio Grande has a PDF on casting with argentium.
Oh, neat.
And they're using the 935. I think they've replaced almost all of it with the 940, but they're pretty much the same. But one of their conclusion says that we do not see any downside to argentium silver. No special casting parameters are required. It recycles well, and it gets adequately hard when it is age hardened without the need for solution annealing.
That's
so
awesome.
So anyway, it's there on Rio. If anybody wants to look that up, it's a PDF.
good girl.
Thank you.
Right. I am at a point where I want to do some more cleanup on the interior of this, because I can see how what it's looking like. And for that, what do I want to use? I need a side scraping tool. I want a sideways facing blade. There's my best choice. I think I'm going to actually just go with my basic knife. Because what I want to do is get a clean sweep around the inside, not have it chopped up. So right now I've still got about, looks like 5 or 6 millimeters of material below. I don't know if I can get in there. Good old tiny ruler. Got it packed up somewhere probably. I've got a much more material down below than I want total by the time I'm done. What have I got in total here? Yeah, I've got a little over 8 millimeters of total height and whatever the difference is right now between the two heights here. That's not going to work. Right, that's why we have this. Come on. So I'm right now I'm at a depth of about 3.4 millimeters. And I think I want to go a little deeper, and then I'll be able to take more material away from the top. So I'm going to go another millimeter or so down. Again, err on the side of leaving more in place, because you can always carve it away with metal tools down the road if you need to. If you've gone too far, it's a pain in the butt to build it back up in metal. And we're also looking to make a relatively flat surface here because we want our stone resting evenly. So you'll see me use the calipers, the back end of the calipers, to check that depth before we're done. Make sure I don't have any kind of slope. Yeah, and I need to remember to slow down. I would like this interior a little cleaner than I have it. I'm gonna try, no, I don't, that's too coarse. I want to have a smooth blade. There we go, that's gonna do it. So I need something that I can get a clean scrape in the interior. And the negative space carving is one of the harder parts of this, is getting a nice consistent look all the way around. But combination of files and burrs and hand tools, and you'll get there. Let's see how deeply that is setting now. So we're marginally lower than I would want to be for the actual setting. Let me zoom in for you guys again so you can see how far in we are. Zoom. Focus for me. No, still too close. There we go. So you can see how low I'm setting that stone right now. That's only barely lower than I want it for the real deal. So it gives me a little room to take material away. I may yet need to dig a little further down because we're still hitting about here for the where, you know, how much thickness I've got. I've got a good millimeter or something below it. So let me do one more pass of cutting through, and then we'll get to the fun part of shaping and carving away the other material. Where's the tool that I keep putting down? There we go. So with wax carving, there's an awful lot you can do once you get comfortable with the various materials, not just the hard waxes and so on. One of a local guy that I really love, who's also just an amazing fellow and teaches some more advanced wax working if you're interested, is a fellow named Thomas Tietze. And he does, his entire collection is really based around fish and oceanic creatures. Let me get zoomed out a little bit. I'm sorry, I realized I was too close for you guys.
Can you spell his last name?
He is Tietze. And you'll recognize it when you see it because he's got all kinds of cool octopuses, and he does trout is his big thing, and salmon because he's Pacific Northwest. And he makes these things he calls ghost salmon, which are half skeletal, half completed fish. And he does them out of multiple metals so that you get to see the bones versus the scaly parts and so on. And they're just incredible. And it's his jam. He loves fishing, and he loves making the sea creatures. And he does a lot of work with pearls. So he builds tentacles from the octopuses that grab a pearl, or the pearl is the head of the piece that he's making. It acts as the octopus body. And it's just super fabulous stuff. Plus, genuinely nice guy who also teaches, so he's a good man to know. I don't know if he does any kind of remote teaching, but he definitely does in-studio teaching. And he's who I send wax students to when they say, okay, so now I've got the basics, what do I want to learn? Him and Kate Wolf are the two folks I highly recommend. Okay, now we're at a good place. I think we're pretty solid there, and it's looking relatively level. Looks like either my stone is lopsided or I need to do a little deeper on this side, but let's check that. If you have a digital caliper and you aren't aware of this function, this little thing that sticks out of the end of it is how you measure depth on something. So you stick it in there, and you still have to have it zeroed out, which I need to remember to do at the start. And then once you open it up, it is once you've gone flush, that's how deep you are, because it's got it sticking out from that much. So I'm 3.25 millimeters on that end, and a little bit. No, it's actually pretty consistent. That's good. Nice. All right, I'm in better shape than I thought. Got a little bit of extra. 3.23. Good. Yeah. 6. One little lumpy bit. I'm just trying to place. Yeah, it's a little deeper than the others. Okay, I got to even this up a smidge, and then I'll be happy. All right. I'm going to stop there, also go nuts over it. So now I have my depth carved. If I were doing a faceted stone, remember, I would put a bevel on this interior. You can put a bevel on it for a cab if you want to, just for visual impact, but you don't have to. But for a faceted stone, you would absolutely want to do that. You can do it later. You could do it with once it's metal, and get the cut in once you're cast. But one of the things I don't worry too much about is, am I a little bit loose on this because of that shrinkage issue? So this stone can easily fall out. It's not like when I'm making a more traditional metal bezel where I'm making it really snug to fit the stone. This having a little bit of wiggle room is not a bad thing because of that shrinkage factor. Again, if it shrinks down too small, I'm going to be cleaning it up with metal tools. So now I can design, what do I want this ring to look like? And this is where I'm going to start doing I'm going to rough sketch it, and then I'll mark it in with the, carving in a little bit of a pattern. But before I do that, I want to sort of think about, what do I want out of the shape of it? I don't know if he gave us any traditional finishing shapes that he did. He did a pretty standard one. So I might take, to emulate John's example, I might decide to take some corner material off, shape it a little bit, and curve it down. Broadly, something along those lines. Take this chunk and stuff off. And then that sort of drives what I might do with the edging. I definitely am too wide at the base. I should have marked my back straight across and get that a center point. This is the harder part to get. 24.61. And so if I'm using that as my center point, I probably want to do some dividing of this and maybe give myself a midpoint mark here. I'm gonna rough it with marker, and then I'll measure and do it right from there. But if I make that my midpoint, you get a color that you guys can actually see. So if I'm making here as my midpoint, I probably want to do a small taper, something along those lines to give myself some shape. But I'm also going to be taking the corners down a little bit, so it'll probably be in from there. And let's see, what do I want to do on the profile? It's just really going to be curving to meet this corner chunk. So something along those lines for a profile. And again, I still haven't really sized this ring, so I'm going to be having to take more material away from the center, which now might be a good time to get a sense of it, because it means less risk of cutting through. You know, I'll know how much material I have to work with. So if I can find my cool scrapey rotating tool. This is the cheapest little thing, but it makes such a difference for taking away into the wax. I think they're like $10 a pop. Don't pay any attention whatsoever to their sizing. It is meaningless. It's even more meaningless than a traditional metal bezels markers. And now we're going to start getting towards not fully thinned out, but towards the size of the walls we want. I want to get my ring size first. I don't have any particular one in mind, so I usually end up making it one that I can wear, which means it's a slightly larger ring. And again, there's going to be a little bit of shrinkage, so a slightly loose ring is not a bad thing. You need more precision if you're trying to do a fancy wedding band or something where it's going to have decorative cut elements and carved elements on the interior and exterior of the band. The one thing I use the marks for is to tell me that I've got equal cutaway from both sides. That gives me a judgment point of have I, you know, carved an amount that's going to fit from both sides equally. And my words are starting to go today. I had lunch, really I did. I don't know what my blood sugar is doing today. If you do take this up and you make these little scrappy bits, put them in a bag, hang on to them, because you can use them for buildup wax when you're starting to do the additive approach, right? You can melt down these little flakes and use them to connect back and add detail and so on. I mean, you're going to have way more of them than you're ever going to use for that. So just keep some, but they are useful in certain parts of the waxwork and stuff. So now let me mark this out a little bit more precisely with measurements. Get some tight matches in here. Let's zero out, please. Divide this up into quarters. Again, just making a nice deep score because I'm going to be working around this and taking away material after I've got it all laid out. Might as well do something similar for proportions over here. Oops, I'm changing my size without realizing it. Hang on a sec. If you realize you have marked up what you don't mean, you can either just put little scratch marks through it so you know that's not your thing, or you can even just scrape it away enough that the marks are irrelevant to what we're doing. I managed to close my calipers as I was marking. Check it all. And really just sort of grid things out to give yourself lines around which you can do your cuts and carving. And it just gives you a little chart you can work by. Do it cleanly. All right, so I'm going to be cutting away these corners. As a starting attempt. I'm just using that grid I made and giving myself the cutaways. I'll get an initial shape from that. And then I'm going to, I think I'm going to be doing down to that line on both sides to give myself a narrower band. See how that goes. All right, so for this is one where I like to go to my X-Acto blade and just do some very careful rough cut. But you could also use the hand carving tools if you're not keen on doing what I'm doing, which is bringing the blade towards your thumb. I find this, so notice that I am supporting my thumb and using the action of closing my hands together as my movement for sort of carrot peeling, so that I also have the ability to stop this hand from going right into the blade. I'm not using anything scraping the point towards myself or what have you.
You don't like the thumb protectors that have some leather?
I haven't ever picked those up. I'm a fairly tactile person, and especially as my hands get more clumsy from age and ailment, I like anything that gets in my way to feel what's happening is sort of frustrating to me. But it's not a bad call if you're comfortable wearing them. So even that little bit you can see is starting to change the profile of the ring. Just took a little bit off that way. Now I'm going to start taking away side material. So once again, it immediately starts to change the look of the piece. And now I'm going to mark the lines going all the way around so that I can actually follow them better. What do I want to like this? Take away all that material. You will go through blades pretty quickly. This one's getting a little dull. I should probably pull out another one. I think I have them all packed up right now. So again, we work from coarse cleanup down to finer detail as we do this. And as a worst case, we can always add material back in using a heating tool of some kind and melt some wax back in. Okay, so we're getting closer to that more traditional ring shape just by taking those big chunks away, the big bites away. A little bit more shaping of this. And I'm going to need to start using some more scrapey, consistent scrapey tools. And so the edge of this thing that we use for the center is a nice way to take a clean, smooth sweep of material off. So I tend to use it, again, holding it just the way I was the blade. And then I can start to work the side, both halves at once to get a consistent profile. The same to the other side. It's a good habit to get into to do a small step to one side and repeat the same step to the other. So you're getting a mirrored look if that's what you need. A lot of my work is not mirrored. It's sort of abstract.
Hey, Rachel,
Mm-hmm.
thanks a lot.
Sure.
I appreciate what you do.
Thanks. I have fun doing it. And this has been a great exercise for me in terms of upping my own game, both in teaching and in metalsmith work, because it's made me challenge what I've been doing and, really think, why did John say it that way? Or what do I agree with from my experience and what do I disagree with from my own practice, while knowing that what works for one person doesn't work for another. So it's been a cool experience. It was terrifying at the beginning, but it's nice to be progressing through it. And I'm super excited that we've gotten this
Right.
much done.
All right, well, I'm going to sign off.
All right. Nice to see you again.
Bye, everybody.
All right. So we're all,
Bye.
look at this shape. We're already getting something that's looking more ring-like. A little bit big for me, a little bit Green Lantern look right now.
Yeah.
But once we get that stone in there, it's going to have a pretty solid look. But we still have way more material around here than we need, so we can trim that further. Was there a question? Sorry, I interrupted somebody, I think. No? Okay. So I'm going to just, because this is a nice clean scrape, I'm going to use it to just sort of work the edge. I can use any of the carving tools. I can use my flat tools. I can use the picks and things like that. I can continue to cut away. Oops, that one doesn't have a scraping tool on it though. I can continue to cut away with the X-Acto. I could go and pull out the heat tools. That's the one I wanted. But you'll find that you'll swap tools a lot as you're doing this because you're going to want different profiles. So for example, this one I'm using now has a nice sort of scoop to it. So it's giving me a cool rounded edge. That's more what I was looking for out of the traditional curvature of the ring. So I'm going to work that around for a while to get my thinning of the top. Again, you're seeing me go about 5 times the speed I would take for really doing this up for a project. I would spend a lot more time finessing each layer of the carve. And I would also have something fancier designed. No, I'd have it designed before I got to this level of the carve. I would have, if I was going to do a side pattern, I'd have a drawing of it, or at least a picture that I was working off of. The last big wax carving piece that I did was some wedding rings for friends, and lilacs were very meaningful to them. So I carved a set of like twined lilac branches. and it was for a friend who's blind. So I needed a lot of texture in it so that he could feel his ring when it was on, and that he could position it the way he wanted. So it has the branches coming together in a little, sort of the where the branch comes off of the tree comes out in a little heart shape at the bottom. So you could always feel that piece and know that it was pointed the right way. And that was a fun carve. That was a long time ago at this point, because boy, it's been a while since they got married. I think they're 10-year anniversary, but that was my most recent, really detailed carving of hard wax. Again, most of my wax work is done in the soft wax. So now I'm gonna just try to shape what I want the corners and the profile to be. And in this wax, what I really want is to take material out from inside. I'm not showing that very well. From inside these points, there's a huge thick chunk in these corners, which is going to be material we don't need. So if I can, I'm going to take away from the inside of that corner lump before we're done. But before I'm ready to do that, I need to know where I'm headed with it and have the design down. If you're interested in starting this kind of wax work, I would go out and get those woodworking tools as your first purchase, because it's a small investment, and then buy some wax to play around with in various shapes. The other thing that we didn't use in here that is a technique used when you're doing, especially on big blocks of wax, if you have a pattern laid out, you can rest it on your piece, and then you use a tiny needle point and you do a little dot pattern to trace the work that you want to carve out. So you're just making sort of a dotted outline of your pattern. And then when you do a light sanding where you put those dots in, it'll end up looking white because the dust stays in the little holes you poked with the needle, and it shows you your pattern without radically getting in the way, because a marker is not going to stay on the wax as you work.
Wow, that's clever. Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of like making your own little tattoo pattern before you get tattooed.
Yes. Did I miss a tattoo conversation? Because I had a bathroom break.
Yes, Alan was asking about the tattoo on my hand, which is roughly is the Sanskrit word for breathe.
Ah, okay.
It's actually to breathe life anew is the translation of it. Basically, it's to remind me to take my time. It doesn't work as well as it should. So I'm just working profile at this point. I'm starting to taper the edges so that it's not just a solid block, and take away what looks good to me. You know, what leaves a comfortable looking shape.
But is this the case how you always work with wax, or just for this specific?
This is for this specific project. Again, I mostly when I do castings, I'm mostly doing them from soft wax, because a lot of my wax series was botanicals, and you can quickly build up florals. In particular, I use hard wax maybe 1 out of every 10 or 15 projects that I do in wax. And this is absolutely not a style I would ever make for my own collections. This is this is a clunky, boxy ring, and it's not at all my organic look that I tend to go for. Plus, I want a lot more texture than I'm putting into this.
Right.
I can go there if I decide to. I could ride the, get past the basics that John's got in the book and go do something funkier. But right now I'm concerned about getting something we can cast and show the how does it set.
Right.
So I'm going to pause and zoom in for you guys, because I want to show you what that little, that was what, 10 minutes of additional carving just to get, I suddenly now am having, come here. You're going to focus for me. I now start to have a real profile of a ring. Let me put the stone in you guys can see where we're headed,
Oh, okay.
right? It's all of a sudden, blammo,
Yeah.
you have ring, right?
Yes.
And I could pause here and do some sanding and finishing, and then maybe decide to carve some intricate, oops, gotta go in camera again, carve some intricate patterns along the walls here, along the sidebar. I could change this. I could do some pierce work in this side so that I can take out some material, lighten up. Oops, I'm out of camera again. Where's my camera? There we go. I could carve, drill some holes and do some negative space. It's pierce work, just like you would do on metal, but you're pre-carving it. So something, in these kinds of rings, when we get into those signet rings and so on, you start to see things that have been, a lot of times there's like a triangle pattern on the side that's done in a different metal, or that's negative space, or that's where the class numbers go. And so those get carved in. These days, of course, class rings are all CAD drawings, and they, swap them in and make them quick and cheap for each class. But this is the gist of what we're doing. We're just taking away, or later on, we might do some additive work to get us to the shape of the piece. Questions about that so far? Whoops, wrong way. Nothing?
It
Okay.
seems like you're gonna have a lot of silver if you're gonna cast it in silver.
Yeah, I'm taking a lot more material off of this. And there's some really wonderful charts out there on the web that show you the conversion rate. So if you have a good scale before you're casting, you will absolutely want to measure your wax and see what the conversion rate is for your metal. That's one of the handouts I give in my hands-on class is a conversion chart. And it'll ballpark for you how many grams of metal it is, because it can get heavy. But again, this space, let me see if I can get that drawn out for you. All of this in here is an area where I can gouge out material and hollow it back. So all that blue markup that I just did, I can take metal away and make the whole project lighter, and should, because nobody wants a ring that it's like gonna weight their hand down. But before I get to that, I have a whole lot more prep work to do. I'm also going to make this a lot thinner, which I tend to not do that till the end, but basically I'm going to do a scrape down and then finesse it, because again, think about the gauge. This is going to shrink a little bit, but if I were to do this right now, even with that little shrinkage, where's my gauge? Oh, I don't know where my gauge measuring device had gone. Must have packed everything up today. But let me tell you what it is in millimeters right now, thickness. Yeah, right now the bottom of this is almost 4 millimeters, which is way too thick for a finished product. So I'm going to be carving down, but again, you'll do a final sizing before that, making sure it's just a little bit loose, but not like slidey loose, not fall off loose. And then you'll take away whatever extra material you have around the outer side. And in fact, profile wise, if I'm taking material away, I'm probably going to want to do a little bit of curve in, rather than this straight up boxy edge. So I'm leaving myself that material to work with at this stage of the game based on the shape. So again, first is where's my stone, and then build the frame of the shape, the rough bones of the shape after that, and then go into the carving of the work. And what was I using that was being successful? Where's my curvy one? There
This is not something you're going to try to finish tonight, are you?
I will go for another 20 minutes at most, and we'll see where we get. But probably not to any kind of, I would use it as a finished project. What I care about is, can I cast it in order to show this setting exercise? It may turn out to be too frustrating to me to not get it cleaner than it is right now. But yeah, normally this would be like a 6 or 8 hour carve with real care and precision. There are people who certainly can carve faster than me. But if I do that, it's just sloppy work.
I mean, I can see putting it on a sander or something. I don't know.
You
That's just
can,
me.
so sanding belt, you're gonna wanna get a coarse sander, but it can go really quickly. Remember that we're using for our normal sanding, we're using this really super coarse stuff. So yeah, absolutely, I can, once I'm done with my marks, I can go through here and sand and so on. But a lot of times, you're gonna be doing such delicate detail on it that a sander will just eat up your wax. So you could use a coarse split mandrel sandpaper burr and get a little bit inside, but again, play with the wax. Some of the waxes will respond better than that than others. But everything that you think you know about coarseness of material, go 10 times coarser in wax than even your like 220 grit sandpaper.
What do you mean?
Meaning, so any traditional sandpapers are just going to clog. The wax is just going to stick to the sandpaper and it'll stop working after about 5 strokes. Let me pull over a piece of sandpaper and show you the effect. Where's the scrap?
I mean, you said think and wax 10 times over. What?
Yeah, I don't mean literally. You're not going to find 20 grit sandpaper, but what I mean is when you're working in wax, all of the tools are coarser versions of what we use in metal. So this is a 320 sandpaper.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't work.
All it does is put crayon marks on it, right?
Right.
It does a little light scratching of the surface and then it stops doing anything other than being a mark on the paper. So until I go to this, where I'm actually taking material off, I need that coarser grit to get me there, or else it just clogs.
Yeah, I like that construction thing. I had never seen it.
Yep, and it's cheap. That's the nice thing.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm seeing as I carve this is that while the square-ish shape is nice, it's kind of freaking me out how it shapes relative to the ring of the oval. So I'm going to turn it into a fully curved top along the top. So I'm getting rid of any of the flat at the top layer and bringing it down into a full curve, which I think is pretty close to what John did in his. Mine's just a little boxier than what he ended up with. And again, there's room for me to do more taking away around the corners if I want. I don't need all that material. I just need a heavy layer right close to the stone. And you'll get in the habit of, you'll hear me blowing things on camera. I'm just literally, every time there's a pile of scrapings, I'm giving it a light blow to move it away so it's out of my line of scrape. So already that smoothing out and giving a bit of curvature to it is making me happier, but you'll see there's a little notch here. I've got to get it a little more even overall, blend it a little smoother, but it's starting to get a nicer shape. And then I may want to emulate that curvature and take away all my flat planes around the sides as well. To give a little bit more traditional softness to it. Now, one of the interesting things about this particular style of ring is that, as was talked about earlier, there's a few different related styles. So could we achieve a similar structure by doing bench work? Could we do something that isn't cast? You bet. And conversely, if you've made a really amazing piece in metal, you can get a mold made of it. That bell that I talked about, I ended up playing around in wax, but then finishing by making my actual model out of sheet. I realized I would get the texturing and shaping better out of the sheet. So you can cast just about from anything as long as you're willing to make the mold from it, and as long as it'll withstand that. And some things you can cast directly from, and just what's called burnout casting, like
Right.
wood and certain wood, not all wood, but certain wood, you can just burn out in the heat of the kiln when you're making your mold, and then have the resulting product from it. My take on mold making is I always make a mold, even if I think it's only going to be a single product, because if you don't make a mold and something goes wrong in the cast, you have lost all your work. But if you do make a mold, you could at least make a new wax from it and make modifications to it. So one of the cool things that you can do is sort of iterative progression of your casting. You can ask that the casting house, or do it yourself if you're doing your own molds, you can make a mold wax in carvable wax instead of in injection wax, which is the one that's used usually for casting directly from. And when you do that, then you take your newly made wax and you carve it further and have them make a mold from the new version of it. If you don't like that, you add more detail. So you can work iteratively from one casting to evolve it into something else.
Yeah, casting it has a lot of possibilities, I think.
It does, yeah. Yeah, there's a reason it's used in the industry so heavily.
Right.
So I'm seeing a little bit of off-centeredness. I have slightly thicker material on one side than the other, which I can work on over time. And when I'm sizing it, the last little bit of sizing, I'll just try to emphasize taking it off of one side versus the other. I'm building in a sort of a comfort curve on the interior line of the ring, because if I'm going to go to all this effort, I might as well make it a comfort fit. So I'm just taking, doing a little bit of beveling to the inner edge. And this is one of those things that you can go as coarse or as clean as you want. And I think it was Wendy that was asking in the beginning about would I use the alcohol lamp. Somebody asked about the alcohol lamp. If I were just doing a straightforward basic ring like this, that last step I might do is to hold it very gently over the alcohol lamp to get, it'll start to melt the surface of it and give it a sort of a gloss. And it acts as kind of a final step of cleaning everything. If I'm doing a lot of detailed carving, I'm really not going to want to do that because I risk melting out the detail that I've put into it with my carving.
Right.
And again, my lines are super critical to me. All those mark out grids that I did, because I can see that I'm doing more work on one side than the other. So I need to balance it out a little bit.
But when you did the grid, did you decide what sizes squares you were gonna do, or?
What I did was when I initially set it up, remember I just quartered it.
Yeah.
I decided to mark quarter marks all the way around, or I think I actually just chose 5 millimeters consistently so that my corners would come off in a square. And then I can work the curve from there. I might have thought it out more if I were doing a project for myself. At this point, I just wanted something to show the effect of working my way down through the steps of carving.
But that's super effective.
It is, yeah. I mean, the grid makes all the difference in the world if you're trying for a very consistent look. Again, I do a lot more organic. So, for example, on that lilac, I just started with the band and started carving away the roughness of the vine of the branch that I wanted in it, and then built my lilac blossoms off of that. So it depends on what your effect is, but if you're going for somebody's precise, neat wedding band, you absolutely are going to want to use that careful measuring to lay out your grid.
Yeah.
Now, for making a design that you're really only doing for purposes of testing this out from John's book, you were making this look like even this is totally your jam, Rachel.
So I love waxworking. I don't do a lot of production work, so I haven't had a collection that needed wax or needed casting in a long time. It was one of my earliest and favorite collections was my flora/fauna collection. which was twigs and small critters, not as many critters as twigs and blossoms. But yeah, I mean, there's some, it's like I said, it's a totally different experience than bench jewelry. I love both of them. This is crafting and carving, and the thing for me that was hardest about this was getting accustomed to the idea of taking away. In fact, it was that same teacher that would threaten to break stuff. When I went, I literally hadn't touched wax since I was probably 10 or 12 when I took it when I was studying it in Oklahoma. They let us do some casting. And I had hated it. It was too fiddly for a kid. It was too much thinking and delicate and precision work. And she started me on it because I had a specific project I needed to get done that would really only be easy in wax. And she reminded me about subtractive, but didn't talk to me about additive. So I hadn't remembered that it was even an option. And when I realized that 5 projects later, man, was I pissed, because additive for the project I did first would have been so much cleaner and so much easier. So I was cranky about carving and carving and carving and carving and carving, and then some more carving and carving and carving and some finer detail carving, and like I hated it by the end of that first project. Thankfully, what I got out of it was that there is something aesthetically pleasing to take a form out of a form that's there. Like, I'm always in awe of sculptors and so on who pick up a rock and are like, I'm going to grind away these parts and voila, there is a bird. Or woodworkers who do the same thing. This is our equivalent of that, you know? Like, I tend to do better at thinking 3-dimensionally when I am fabricating, when I'm building out of object work. This uses a different part of our brains, and it takes a while to connect to it. And it's one of the reasons I absolutely prefer doing the soft wax, because that is a more additive process. But yeah, it's that whole, like, I grew up on fairy tales where you're finding the creature that lives in the whatever, in the wood or in the stone, you know, there's nymphs in the trees and things like that. And so what we're doing is we're pulling out the art that was in this lump of plastic, right? And we've shaped it out of that. We've shaped it all dimensionals, and it makes your brain think about your work differently.
Yeah,
So
that's very interesting. And also your comment about the being fiddly part, because I often think of that as you're working and you're talking about your patients and all that. So I wondered how you felt about this particular reductive. It's interesting.
So waxwork to me is more solitary. Like, I can do a lot of bench work, fabrication, hanging out with other people. I also crochet. I used to design high-end, you know, hand-dyed crocheted sweaters for a while. This is crocheting style jewelry making for me, because you just get into the groove and you're working it and you're seeing it and you're seeing something's not quite right. I would encourage you guys to try this, if nothing else, for it trains your eye to see your materials differently. And it will help you in your metal, in your bench fabrication as well, because my eye for seeing things that are slightly off, you know, that one side is curving a little lower or more than the other. You're just working in wax. Wax is cheap. You're not working in silver and, oh my God, you've spent hours soldering it. Worst case is you throw this piece of plastic wax out and you do it again, right? So it helps train your eye to form. It helps train your eye to the details. You can go basic like this, or you can go crazy and start figuring out how do you get into things and dig into it. If I were going to do those negative spaces, I would start by drilling some holes, just like I would if I were doing negative space in a sheet metal. But then I have to work from the inside, taking away material to expand it. I can't do that whole, like, I'm on a ring. How do I get my saw blade up in there to saw the whole negative space? I don't. I have to carve it. So I guess I think it appeals to me for the break from the everyday bench fabrication, but also for the insight into what it can become. Like, it helps. Really,
Really interesting insights. Thank you.
Rachel, did you ever, this is Deborah Long. The question I have is, did you ever take like when you first started getting into carving, and did you ever do casting yourself once at least in class?
No. So the only casting I have ever done is sand casting, and I do some, like I'll occasionally do a batch of straw casting or water casting. I do a lot of water.
I asked because for me, I think going from the steps of carving and being in a classroom with other students was such a big help. Because I could see how much material they were safely taking off, and then we would all learn the casting. I did it for a while. I don't think I do it at home either. But what was really wonderful is that relationship between how much you're taking away, how thick your wax form is. I wouldn't have been able to get it unless I was doing what you're doing, and that is you're carving and then you're going to cast it.
Yeah, I'm going to get you one of my early experiences if I haven't got it packed away for students right now. I have one. It's not polished up, but you guys will see. Yeah, when you talk about not getting it, that it's a thick piece of material. I did this series. I did a set of these as theatrical props. This was a mystical adventure that people had to go on to find the containers of the scarabs of whatever the creature was that was the monster at the end of the hall. And so I did this as, in this case, it was a subtractive and additive carving, I think. Yeah, I did both. And I didn't understand those proportions of metal. And then I sent it off for casting. I think it was a $600 casting bill for 6 of them, or $800 in brass, right? It didn't need to be this thick, and this can knock you out. That's how thick this thing is. And I would have done it much thinner had I understood that better. But yeah, this was one of those, I wish my instructor at the time had given me a little bit more guidance on that. But it's, I have 5 of the 6 left. I gave one to somebody that was running the theatrical storyline for this so that she could have
have you saved any of your other carvings that you haven't cast?
That I haven't cast. So I have some samples. Let me see. I think my sample box is in easy reach. Most of my wax work is up for my class coming up because it got rescheduled, but hang on a sec, let me grab it, see what I've got. Maybe this is it. I have a lot of my in-flight works, things that I've done that I still have. Oh, here's the bell I was talking about. Doesn't have its banger right now, but that's the little tiny, looks like a baby's hat kind of bell. What have I got for samples? Me. Belt buckle. Now let me zoom out a bit so you guys can see.
Wow.
There's the belt buckle. Here's one of the few florals that I kept in my collection. So this was an iris. And that's done with the soft wax.
And the buckle was cast in bronze?
This was brass. Belt buckle was brass.
How many pounds is the buckle?
Oh, the buckle is probably about 8 ounces, I would say. So here are some of I only have the soft waxes here. It looks like, oh, there's a hard wax in there. So there's an in-flight hard wax ring. And
but
then
the top is soft.
Pardon? No, this is actually all hard wax. This is the wax we've been working on today. These are soft waxes.
Oh,
They
that's
look
beautiful.
so delicate. Yeah,
Right.
they're so beautiful.
That's why I like the soft wax. It's more on par with just being able to shape and forge the metal. And this is done with a heat tool, and this is the stick wax, the rod wax, which is very soft, and then the sheet wax that somebody was asking about. Sonia, I think you were pulling some of that out. And again,
it looks really organic.
right.
Your flower work, it reminds me of casting, dried out things, that I pick up from a forest.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
For me, I like that emulation of it's so you absolutely cast. Lots of people do the casting of twigs and branches and things like that, natural straight up casting, and I love that look. For me, what I wanted is it not quite the actual object, but my interpretation of it. So I do I'm a lousy photographer of jewelry, but man, I love photographing macro plants and bits and bobs around my neighborhood, especially now that I've moved to Oregon, because it rocks out here for that. And then I like to take those photographs and use them to decide what I'm going to construct. So this is the cherry blossoms that bloom pretty steadily out here in the spring. So that's my jam on the building of the wax. But again, very different feel building it in soft wax than the carving. Carving is a meditative thing.
Will you hold up the carved ring that you did the blossoms on with the hardwood?
Yeah, sure. It's only about a quarter of the way towards what I would do. It's just me showing how I can get that lilac effect.
Yeah, that's amazing though.
Yep. And that is using a lot of these tiny wolf tools. And it's a lot of, so what you need to practice when you're working with the hard wax is how it behaves when you drag backwards versus when you push forwards with your tools versus when you scrape across something. All three of those actions, depending on the tool, even one tool, you'll get three very different effects from. So it's a little hard to see. I don't think we can get it close up enough on this one for the texture to really be seen, but let's see. Oh, maybe.
It's better. It's getting better almost.
Yeah,
there
there
it
go.
is.
Yeah, there. Oh,
So the textures, how there's little ridges inside of the plant. That texture is done with one of the small carving tools, like a scraper tool or something like this. And I'm just peeling backwards small bits.
See.
Oops, sorry. I'm just pulling backwards with a scraper.
Okay.
Carve out small pieces of it.
Right.
Whereas if I were trying for that texture in the soft wax, I would do it very differently. This will tear up the soft wax. In the soft wax, my ridges are created by using a low heat of my heat point and dragging it across the wax very lightly so that it's melting in a little ridge. So very different techniques. Oops, I'm out of frame. There we go. Very different techniques to get similar textural components.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Thank you for sharing that. It really really shows how much you can do.
If you want to learn more, Portland is a short hop on a plane away from most of you, and I've got a class coming up. So
when is your class?
It got moved to April 15th and 16th. It's a weekend class, and it's in person in a really cool studio that started just at the outset of the pandemic when one of our local craft schools had to close.
And that's in Portland?
It's in Portland, Oregon. It will be a beautiful time of year in Portland. If you've never been to Portland in spring, especially if you are plants and flowers based in the things you love in the world. Some amazing hiking in the forest. It's just ending rainy season and starting into not so rainy season as opposed to the heat of summer, because it's been getting really hot here in August. There's if you're a foodie, Portland is an amazing town. So it's a cool little mini vacation trip if you're interested. And that is in the chat, the links to that, or you can just go to my website and follow the classes. The waxworking class is hosted by the Creative Metal Arts Guild of Portland. So that one's, you don't register through my site, but I've got a link to their site so you can still register.
And that's how I took most of my classes that even weren't, as I worked through the guild, I got, it's just great. If you can have a
Nice.
guild around you, joining one is everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And CMAG, I was president of it for 2 years right after I moved out here, which was a little silly on my part to get that heavily involved, like literally 6 months after I moved to Portland, but it's what I do. And they put on a great show, a craft show with 5 other guilds in the heart of Portland in the spring, called the Gathering of the Guilds. And it's a really interesting show because each guild has its own section. So it's not like the jewelers and metalsmiths are interspersed with everybody. So people self-edit. Oh, I don't want to see the glass. Why? You wouldn't want to see glass? I don't know. I'm going to judge you, but I don't want to see the glass. I just want to see the wood and the metals. So you can go to those sections. It was a weird experience the first time I did it, but it's really got a lot of camaraderie and support amongst the guilds. And so it's got 350 artists in, and it runs for 3 days. It's huge. We get like 50,000 people coming through. So it's kind of amazing. And you just have to be a member of one of the guilds to show at it. Most guilds don't even have a jurying process. So I'll be at that. That said, so that gave us the basics of this. And yes, given where I am, my anal retentiveness will not let me send that out for casting until I've taken some material away from it and things like that. I can either hold and do the detail work on screen for you guys, if that's your preference, or I can just do it and send it out and we'll get back for it when we are doing the actual setting of it. Any strong preferences one way or the other?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'd rather see it. No, I don't want you to work alone. So we are here with you. Next class is fine.
Okay. Anybody
I was
else?
gonna say the same thing. I was
wanna
gonna
say
say, since it's towards the end of the book, I would just give it your spin, your look, because you're gonna cast it. Just make it yours.
I agree.
Okay. So then I will plan on, I'll use my judgment about, because I'm traveling right before our next session, which is, again, we're not doing the 5th, we're doing the 19th. I may just plan on coming back to work on that, or I may do the already planned, what is our next setting? Faux channel setting. And then the session after that, I'll come back to the wax. I'll decide which way I'm going to go as I get closer to it. Anybody have anything they want to show today? Any work you've been doing? Show and tell?
No, but before, you said that you are encouraging your students with wax to work with alternative, not to buy expensive tools.
Oh, yeah. If you're just trying to figure out if you can even stand doing it, because it's a definitely different set of experiences than working in metal. Don't spend, like, the wolf tools. The smallest set is like $175, right? And the biggest set is $280 or something. I love her tools, but don't buy them just to try wax working. Start with the $10 wood carving tools and some wax.
Right. What I have, I don't know if you probably know about it, that I think when I started, we did this kind of stuff. Can you see it?
Yep. And so, yeah, that's
but this was made with some, it works. I don't know what to tell you, but it works.
Iron turned into a heating tool. In the next session, I will pull out my heating tools and show you some of that. It's a very fiddly little delicate thing compared to what you've got there. With tiny, like,
but if you want to do basic stuff, this was I think $17.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. The tips of the one that I use are sort of this size, so there's a lot of control to it. With the one you've got, especially things like the air bubble correction that I was talking about is very challenging. This is the kind of point you need to get more detailed. However, there's something called a wax maxer that you can get on Rio, which is a battery powered, very crude version of the heat tools. So you can go, like you're going camping with your family and you want something to keep your hands busy, you bring that and some AA batteries and you can work on your wax projects while you're sitting out at the campground picnic table, right?
I think that's like a beading tool made for doing something with thread, heavy cable thread.
Oh, originally it was
for
designed
melting or
all I
doing
know is it
something,
gets
but
bloody hot. It's so
it was
started
it was
like
it was a standard part anytime I did waxing.
Yeah.
for
That
like
little tool, I used it all the time.
so that the thread doesn't come unraveled or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. That makes sense. I would have thought it was a little too hot for that because it feels like it could burn through some threads, but I believe it. So that's what I'll plan to do. Anybody have anything they want to show off today?
Carmen must have something.
We're counting on you, Carmen.
Oh, I could show you something.
Okay.
I posted it already in the group though.
Was it the
Yeah, I think I saw
plus setting?
something.
Yeah.
Nice. Have you been
We're
practicing?
not all in the group.
Well, this was the ring.
Oh, that, yeah, okay. So not the flush setting, but yeah.
And
Lower.
I started off a higher cone because I like the cones.
Yep.
But I kept on going lower and lower because the stone didn't quite fit in.
Okay.
So I was starting to get confused because once I got it to the size I thought it belonged, I have the tube setter. So I did the tube.
Mm-hmm.
It set it.
Yep.
And then I went in with the hammer drill to give it the bezel.
Okay.
And then it was all rough and really bad. So then I went and I filed it. And I thought that I pushed it in with the bezel pusher, that it worked. But then when I pushed it from behind,
It pops
fell
out. So the thing, yeah. The thing I was trying to express on the list in response to that was not that the height of your bezel was bad. It was that I don't think you've got it sitting down low enough in its seat. Did you make the seat? So the inside, the lip. Yeah, I think it still needs to be a little bit lower in the step. So just take your burrs and bring that down a little bit. If it's round and you can get a round burr the right size, a setting burr. Use the setting burr to cut it a little lower. If not, then use a barrel burr carefully around the outside edge a little bit. But I think you're on the right track. I would predict two other things. I would predict that you didn't use a big enough setting thing when you did your set, because that should have been enough to at least push it around to hold it. So I'm betting it was a little too small for the push down that you needed. You need it. So on the way that those setting tools work is they should be sort of like wrapping around the outer edge of it, just hanging over. So there's a little bit of an overhang beyond the wall, right? It should rest partway down, because what you're doing is using that curve to force the material over the stone. So that's a second prediction. And then my prediction for what you're using for your hammer tool is, did you buy bits for your hammer? You bought the set of setting hammer tools?
Yeah.
Did you do anything to them after you got them?
I basically filed the edges so it wouldn't be rough.
Okay. So if you're still getting marks after that, you need to blunt those edges more and go to your polishing wheel with a Tripoli or another cutting compound and burnish them, soften the edges using that tool all the way around. Mine almost looked round by the time it was done. It's still got, the rectangular shape or the square shape, depending on which one you're doing, but that's how much you're blunting it. So I think if you're getting marks, one, you need to soften that edge. And then two, you need to make sure that you are in the right position relative to it, because any little bit of tip can create those hammer marks. And also multiple passes of it. So don't think, I know we've done one project. I can't remember which project we did where I used the hammer setting. It must have been the heavy bezel early on in like session 3 or 4. So you might be able to see it on there, but the act of using that hammer, the first pass is going to be a little blocky. It's going to be little thunk, 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 thunk all the way around. My final passes are holding that to the stone and moving it across in an even move while my hammer is going, right? So I'm doing a sort of a pass that softens all the marks and blurs it into each other. So take that when you're done with all your other setting, it's the equivalent of using the burnisher on it. We're just using it as a push burnisher, slow and steady all the way around the piece. But that looks stunning.
Could you pin yourself when you talk?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I forgot. I'm not here. I'll do the add spotlight. So that action that I was describing is the final bit. So I've used my hammer and it's gone thunk, 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 thunk all the way around the edge, right? And that may leave little blop, 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 blop spots, especially if I pick it up too much and sort of skip steps. That's one type of texture, but it sounds like you got a little rougher even than that. But then the final pass I'm doing is literally just sliding it along slowly all the way around the piece. So I'm not lifting it at all. I'm doing a slow, steady, keep the hammer moving at like microscopic speed. So I'm layering, if I've gotten a little bump in it, I'm layering across it on that final pass and pushing it all down at a consistent level. And that sometimes takes one pass. It sometimes takes more than one. I tend to do that with I use the rectangular shaped bit most of all for that. I tend to like the rectangular shaped one because I can work it either horizontal to the material or vertical to the material, depending. So I tend to take the vertical approach, the longer line running across that final pass all the way around the stone.
I think that's something I need to figure out because I haven't had my hammer drill. I kind of stick to one because that's the only one I know. And I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, but I used it for my my trillion rings. So something worked.
Good.
But with this one, it was really bad. And I kept on thinking, you know how you do the bright cut? I see it online all the time. I'm like, I want to do the bright cut. Maybe that will work. But because I'm like a little, I don't want to do it with my engravers. I think I just need to polish them more. And I already have 2 cute little marks here that are going to be with me forever.
So remember, when I was demoing, and I said this a lot, when I was demoing those, the bright cuts and the graver work, I was telling you repeatedly, this is not the position I would normally do it in. I had to do that so that you guys could see it on camera. It needed to be up on something and in your faces. That is better done on the surface flat so that your hand is not in front of it, right? Or if you have to be in your graver's ball, put your hand below on the graver's ball to control it, not in front of where you're going to be sliding. Because absolutely, that's a problem. But also remember with gravers, if you're getting a lot of catch and slide, you are probably not sharp enough. That's the big thing. It's a good indicator of that. So anybody else have anything they want to show off before we wrap for the night? Okay, gang, I'm going to remind you that it would be really cool if I can send photos of in-progress work or finished things that this work has inspired you to do. And I'm not going to get, like, we'll have some time after we finish the whole series. I'll put a call out there for more of them. But I'm sort of thinking if I get enough, I might make one of those little printed books for John where you can send off all your photos and we'll put a little bit of thank you to him together into a book. So
but like I'm not happy with anything I do, so if I do it I will just send it because I want you to have it and see it, but I don't like it.
So here's the thing on that. We're all on a learning journey. If you want to put it on a piece of white paper and jot a note about what you learned from it so that John can see that you're not done with it. You're experimenting, and this was you can say my first time trying, if you want to qualify it, or you know, here's what I want to do differently next time, and just jot a note down or something.
Okay.
Something nice that we can do for him to show him that his work is continuing on even
Right,
after
right.
teaching.
Oh yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
For process
want-
photos.
Right. Process
In
photos. Yes.
Process photos. That's what I send you mostly
Yep.
of.
Yes, you did.
I'm sorry. I just didn't know how to compress. They were
Yeah,
too large.
I'm zero.
All
So I
good.
don't know with the camera. I want to ask you something before you go. Can you tell me, is this a burnisher
Hang on a
bit?
second. Oh, yeah, so it's a sort of burnisher. Hang on.
What
It's
is
the
this
spinny wheel.
for?
Why is it not letting me spotlight you? Hang on. Remove spotlight. See if I can do that. So yeah, it is for, it's actually related to our casting discussion. And let me see if I can spotlight you so other people can see it up close. It's got little beads in it around the wrapper. They're steel. And so it acts as a burnisher. Where is my pin going? There we go. Spotlight for everyone. Can you hold it a little further back from your camera so people can get the focus? Yeah.
Wait,
Little closer to your nose.
closer to my nose.
There we go. Then it'll
There.
focus. There we go.
Okay,
So
yeah.
it's for us. So it's got little like ball bearings in it, gang. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's like my teacher used to call it a beater. Because it really literally is used a lot in casting. It's used to hit the spots that have porosity in it and push the material around it.
Oh,
Right?
okay,
So you
okay.
take it and you see a little nub and you go clunk, 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 clunk with that, and it burnishes it down and solidifies that spot. But it's also used for other burnishing effects. It's one of those, you use it like once every 8 or 10 months, and when you need it, you really need it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have another instructor that I worked with who instead of using that, she would bend a little U into the end of a dead burr, and it would flip around like a beater on a mixer, a stand mixer, and it would go thunk, 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 thunk. Scariest tool mod I've ever used because it's not terribly well controlled, but it has a nice little hit spot where the curve hits every time, and so it acts as the same thing. She didn't want to spend the money on one of those.
So I don't know why it's here. I have a lot of stuff that I don't know.
Yeah.
So can you use it for something else?
I mean, so if you get, if you have been rolling your own sheet metal and there's a weird little blob in it or a little bit of like a bubble of some kind, it can beat that down into submission, basically.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank
I
you.
think I've used one 5 times in my life, maybe. That's how rare I use that kind of piece.
Okay. Well, now at least I know what's good.
We could have an after workshop little show and tell of here are all the tools in my collection that I don't know what they're for. Coffee club.
We all have that.
Robin Cornelius calls it a bezel roller, and she has a couple of classes on it.
What is she using beyond what I've described?
Say again, you broke up.
What does she use it for beyond? Like the name bezel roller implies that she's hitting her bezel in some way.
She rolls it right around the bezels. Yeah.
By hand or in her flex shaft?
Oh, I think it was by hand.
Okay, because
It can't be because it has to.
This goes in the flex shaft. This is
goes in the flex shaft.
Huh. Okay. Interesting.
She calls it a bezel helper.
Bezel helper. Is she using it as like the final push down?
She calls it a cheap man's hammer device.
Somebody else took that class.
I bought the thing before she even offered the class, and then I couldn't. Well, what the heck is this for? I went through that same thing.
So one of the things that has always stuck with me is that John says any tool worth buying is only worth buying if it does more than one thing. So that's a good other thing. I may pull mine out and go, huh, what does it do? Oh, I even have the beater that I was talking about. Hang on, I can see it right in front of me. Get my armpit for a minute. This is the beater tool that she made me. This is Rachel Wengenroth who taught me that. Isn't that a scary looking thing?
Can you pinpoint yourself, Rachel?
Oh yeah.
How does it move?
You put it in your flex shaft, And so it's doing this.
Okay,
right?
okay.
And so it's off balance, off balance, which my brain has always told me is a bad thing in a flex shaft, but it's designed to just go hit, similarly to the principles of the tool you just showed us. But she just
Yeah.
made that by adjusting a
We-
dead burr.
We had to do that too with a nail, and you just bent the nail and
Yep.
then it would just flip. Yeah.
So we learn to be, we learn to make the tools we need, which is sort of ties nicely back to our Romans and their making of these pieces of jewelry without all the tools we have. We are apes making our tools.
Yeah,
As
sure.
artists, we can do anything. We
Right.
can make it work.
Yeah,
Usually
yeah,
that happens.
that's what the therapist told me. If
Yeah.
anything you don't find an explanation, you want to say you're an artist and you're excused. So
I'll take it. That sounds like a good note to end on, gang. So I hope this was a
Yeah.
nice foray away from our traditional bench work, and we'll make some more progress on it either next session or the session after. Again, no session next week. I'll post a reminder to the Facebook group, but please just don't
Okay.
show up when you won't get a reminder note from me either. But some people show up anyhow because they've got it in their calendars. So
Thank you.
Okay.
thank you,
Have a good
Rachel.
time.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Rach.
bye.
Great session.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Come on, Zoom, end for me.